Welcome everyone to the 45th Virtual Roundtable on Measuring Corruption. It's I for some reason feel like it's been a while, even though these are held once a month, and have been the case for the last almost 4 years. But I think this time it's been around 6 weeks since the last one, so I feel a little rusty. But very much looking forward to today's conversation. I'm very excited to have Aaron, Dr. Áron Hajnal now. He just successfully defended his dissertation last week. Aaron, congratulations again. Uh, and I reached out to him a few months back because he has a recently published paper that I shared in the call called Varieties of Corruption, a typology of country-level corruption patterns using fuzzy set ideal type methodology. And even though it doesn't square perfectly with the traditional conversation about measuring corruption, something that I continue going back to more often recently, as reflected in the July roundtable where we discussed the definition of corruption, is that in order to measure something, we have to have a pretty clear idea of what that phenomenon or phenomena is. And so I've been looking forward to holding a conversation on a typology of corruption, or ways to classify the forms of corruption that may be more peculiar to certain countries compared to others. Um, and so I'm very excited about today's conversation. I will invite Aaron to start sharing his screen and introduce himself in a minute. Before I do so, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Again, if you joined us before, none of this will be new. The video is being recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube in 4 weeks' time. During the presentation, please make sure to keep your microphones off. Unless you have a question or comment that you would like to ask about the slide that is being presented at that moment, you're more than welcome to interrupt either by reaching, yeah, by clicking the hand emoji or raising your hand physically, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask the question. Otherwise, Aaron, I'll also potentially be asking a couple of questions by clicking the hand emoji, just in case. Uh, for the first comment, if you guys could also very briefly introduce yourself, specifically your affiliation and your area of interest in relation to measuring corruption, that would be very informative for the rest of us as well. All right, and one last thing, of course, we also have Attila Barta with us, who is part of the research team behind this work with Aaron. I understand Attila may also jump in to comment or answer any difficult questions or questions that are more related to his specific contribution to it. So Attila, if that's the case, of course, by all means, feel free to jump in at any moment. All right, great. So Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Joseph, for this exciting opportunity. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming. My name is Áron Hajnal. As Joseph mentioned, I just finished my PhD studies last week. I was studying at Corvinus University of Budapest, and I live in Budapest now. Last year, I was in Berlin at Hertie School for a year as a visiting researcher. And my main research interest involved corruption. Most of my dissertation was also about corruption and autocratization and political corruption, and in particular how these three phenomena relate to one another. So this is it in a nutshell. Attila, do you wanna do a quick presentation too before I start?
Thank you, Aaron. So I'm Attila Barta. I was Aaron's supervisor during his doctoral studies. I am an associate professor at Corvinus University of Budapest and an editor-in-chief of a journal called Intersection East European Politics and Societies. My main research is about welfare policy reforms and the relationship between policy outcomes and politics. And corruption is part of these core research issues. But I'm not a classical corruption researcher at the same time.
Thank you very much, Attila. So I will begin the presentation. Can you see the screen?
Now you got cut.
It got cut. Oh,
Yes, you were already sharing your screen.
okay. Now it's good.
Yeah, there you go. Could you just make it full screen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just one note before I start. I can only see the slides now, so I don't think I will see your hands if you raise them. So please, if you have a question, just feel free to jump in and like
Sure. I'll just jump in if there are any questions or comments.
okay, thank you very much. Um, so this paper I'm going to talk about is titled Varieties of Corruption, a typology of country-level corruption patterns. It's been recently published in Political Science Review, and it's a co-authored paper by Attila Barta, who just presented himself, and József Péter Martin, who is the chief executive of the Transparency International's Hungarian chapter, and by myself. A quick outline of the presentation. First, I'm going to talk about the backgrounds and the motivation for the study. Then I'm going to briefly present the fuzzy set idea type analysis approach that we use to construct the typology and then to assign countries to idea types. And after that, basically, I will go along the steps of fuzzy set idea type analysis, and I will tell how we constructed the typology and how we assign countries. And of course, I will end the presentation by a few discussion points and concluding remarks. As I'm sure you are very well aware, there are a number of country-level corruption indices, like the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, or VGI's Control of Corruption Index, or VDAN's Political Corruption Index. And of course, these indices are super useful to grasp broad patterns of corruption and track, by and large, how countries evolve in corruption. We don't say that these are bad, but we say that these country-level indices do not capture degrees in the do not capture differences in the nature of corruption. So they tell whether corruption is more or less, but it doesn't tell what type of corruption different countries experience. And we argue that countries differ a lot, not only in degree but also in the nature of corruption. So
Aaron, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, it just cut off from my side. Now I can hear you as well.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I hope the internet is okay.
Yeah. Could you click the full screen button, please?
Yes, sure. We argue that corruption is in fact a very much multifaceted phenomenon, and therefore it's useful to discern different types of corruption. And to that end, we set off to build a typology of country-level corruption patterns, which captures qualitative rather than quantitative differences in corruption across countries. Of
Aaron,
course,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't think we're still able to see it full screen.
Yeah, that's strange. I will for me it was. I will start sharing again.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know what the issue may be.
Let's just try one more time. If it doesn't work, we'll see it a little smaller, but we'll be fine.
Um, okay, and now I open the. Is it full screen now?
No, it must be projected to your secondary screen probably.
I don't have a secondary screen
Ah.
now. Wait, I will try something else. I will just not share that window, but I will share my screen.
Okay.
Um, Entire screen. Now you can see yourself, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And now it's full screen.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, I hope it will stay that way.
No.
Yeah. Um, so basically, this is why we think it's useful to construct the typology of corruption patterns, which allows for discerning different types of corruption rather than just seeing whether corruption is more or less in certain countries. Of course, there are some typologies of corruption already. For instance, for corrupt acts or actions, there is the typology of Eng and Greykar, and I put Eng twice. These typologies focus on specific like actions or acts that involve corruption. There are also country-level corruption typologies. Perhaps the most influential among these is Johnston's Syndrome of Corruption book, in which he discerns four what he calls syndromes of corruption, which are similar to our outcome. I will come back to this point. Innes's state capture typology and Munjo Pippidi's typology, in which he discerns universalist states, patrimonialist states, and type between the two. We built on this work to a large extent, but these typologies were more theoretical in the sense that they described ideal types, but in most of them there was no systematic effort to assign countries based on actual data to the types of the typology. They were mostly theoretical in nature, and they involved illustrative examples, but there was no systematic classification effort in these studies. And that is what we are trying to do. And to that end, we employ this so-called fuzzy set idea type analysis, which is a method based on set theory and Boolean algebra, and it's similar to QCA, to qualitative comparative analysis. It's in fact a specific subtype, I might say, of qualitative comparative analysis. Fuzzy set ideal type analysis allows for constructing so-called Weberian ideal types, which mean basically that these are ideal types are a perfect version of a type, and it may be that we cannot observe this ideal type empirically, but nonetheless, that's the ideal typical case of a certain group. Fuzzy set ideal type analysis also allows for assigning cases, which here are countries, to the ideal types. And what makes it fuzzy set is that it also allows for ascertaining the degree to which cases or countries conform the ideal types. So it tells, for instance, like France, it tells which ideal type France belongs to, but other than that, it also says how similar France is to the ideal type that it belongs to. It's very similar. It means that it's a very typical case of that ideal type. If it's a bit further, it means that it's similar to an ideal type, but not that similar. Our main outcome, or the subject of the typology, is country-level corruption patterns, that we defined as distinctive country-level corruption profiles characterized by the magnitude of corruption types and the mechanisms and networks through which they operate. So I think the main word here is profile. So corruption pattern would be the ensemble of how, what types of corruption are prevalent, what types. For instance, one of our ideal types, testimonialism. Sorry, you were saying something?
Yes, your audio got cut for a little bit there. So if you could just kind of like rewind about half a minute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what the problem is. My computer says that the connection is perfect. I'm sorry. I don't know what the issue is. But sure. So our main outcome is corruption, country-level corruption patterns, which refer to distinctive country-level corruption profiles, which are characterized by the magnitude of corruption, corruption types, and the mechanisms and networks through which they operate. So this is the phenomena, this is the country-level phenomena for which we set on to develop a typology. Now I will briefly present the steps of fuzzy set idea type analysis using an example. I thought this may be useful before before I actually present the typology for corruption patterns. So the first step of this method is to identify dimensions of the typology. Let's say we want to build a typology for flats, houses, flats. And we say that there are two main dimensions based on which we're going to do the typology: size of the flat and the centrality of the flat. So this is the first step, to find the dimensions based on which variables, based on which you're going to describe. In the second step, we define idea types based on the dimensions. If there are two dimensions, then it will mean that there is 4 or 2 to the power of 2 idea types. As on the right, you can see this graph. One dimension is the centrality, the location of the flat, and the other is the size of the flat. These two dimensions demarcate 4 idea types, which the first one is big flats in the center, second big flat in the outskirts, third small in the center and small in the outskirts. Of course, if we had 3 dimensions, then we would have 3 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 3, that is 8 idea types. If we had 4 dimensions, then we had 2 to the power of 4, that is 16 idea types. So this is the second step. It follows strictly from the first step to define the idea types of the typology.
Aron, could I ask a question about this?
Sure.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through the methodology, because this is one of the, I guess, more complex parts of the paper, especially for again a political scientist, and the corruption part I got, but the methodology, yeah, I had to read it a couple of times to fully get it. In this example of the houses, right? So we end up with 4 quadrants based on the two dimension, right?
Yes.
If I understand correctly, you're saying that rather than an ideal type being an average value within the quadrant, is rather the extreme value of that quadrant, correct?
Exactly. So the idea type would be, for instance, IT1, big house in the center, would be
Mhm.
enormous house which is located exactly in the center.
Right.
So that's the idea type, and as I mentioned, it may be that we don't even see ideal typical cases in real life, but that is the perfect version, the 100% version of a big house in the center. So the idea type.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, that's a good point. Definitely that idea types don't necessarily exist. Often they don't exist, I would say. In a third step, we operationalize the dimensions, or dimensions in set theoretic terms are often called sets. And basically first find raw data to operationalize the twin dimensions. So for instance, with the size dimension, it could be the square meters for the flat size. For the centrality, it could be, I don't know, kilometers from the city center. So that's the raw data that we use to operationalize these concepts. Then in the fourth step, we calibrate the raw data into fuzzy set membership scores, which means that based on whatever variable type we have, we create this membership scores, which is a number from 0 to 1, 1 being the value of the ideal typical case, so the highest value, and 0 being the opposite of that. So for instance, in dimensions, in the centrality dimension 1, membership score of 1 means that the house is perfectly central, and 0 means that the house is the most farther possible from the center. Or 0 is the smallest flat possible with the size dimension, and 1 is the hugest flat possible. So when we calibrated our raw data into these fuzzy set membership scores, then for each dimension and each case, we have such fuzzy membership score. And based on this, we can ascertain which idea type is the closest to each case, to each house. So for instance, say there is house X that has a fuzzy set membership score of 0.8 in size, so it means that it's fairly big, and it has a fuzzy set membership score of 0.85, which is in centrality. It means that it's quite central as well, and this will lead to a membership. It will mean that this house belongs to IT1 because it's a big central house, and that it has a membership score in IT1 of 0.8. Other example, house Y, it has a 0.2 membership score in size, which means that it's rather small, and it has a 0.45 membership score in centrality, which means that it's not very central. And sorry, this is a problem here. It means that it belongs to ideal type 4. So it belongs to the fourth ideal type, which is a small flat, which is small flats in the outskirts of the city, and yeah, it's not very close to the ideal type because it's not that much in the outskirts, and it's not that small, but still it's the closest to the fourth ideal type.
So a follow-up question to this point, again, just to make sure that we're all clear about this. So for example, for house X, does this methodology then imply that we get scores for each one of the 4 quadrants for house X? And then
Yes,
we see which
exactly.
one is a better fit.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So we can calculate the membership score of house X to all 4 ideal types, and it will have a very low membership score in the other ideal types.
Right.
It will have the highest membership score in ideal type 1, but we can calculate the membership score in other ideal types, and basically they will say how similar house X is to the 4 ideal types, with larger numbers indicating more similarity. Is the most similar to the first ideal type. And the house Y has a membership score in IT4 of 0.55, which means that it's that's the closest, but it's not that similar to the ideal type because it's in fact quite central. It has a centrality score of 0.45, so it's almost at the cutoff value of 0.5.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So now I will proceed by doing the same stuff, basically just with corruption and not with houses. So first, we defined dimensions based on which we demarcate these corruption types. Because corruption is very hard to observe, and as we know, it's very hard to find good data on corruption. Rather than looking for data on corruption per se, we sought to describe the broad structural forces that shape corruption, and the dimensions capture these structural factors. We had 3 dimensions in the typology. The first is the power of the state, which refers to the capacity of the central state to implement policies. We will argue, I will show that this is all 3 dimensions are very important factors in shaping corruption, and how they interact with one another also have a great role in shaping emergent corruption patterns. So the first one is the capacity of the central state to implement policies. We base this on Acemoglu and Robinson narrow corridor framework, for those of you who are familiar with it. They argued that emerging kind of state, whether it's an abusive or a good kind of state, depends on the power of the state and on the power of the society. Basically, our first two dimensions reflect this. It's based on this framework. But going back, the first dimension is power of the state, or the capacity of the state to implement policies. Both Norway and Nazi Germany would probably get a high score power of the state, because they both have the power to implement policies in various domains. So power of the state can simply be used for the good or for the bad, depending on the other two factors. The second factor is societal control over corruption, which refers to the willingness and the ability of societies to counterbalance the state and step up against corruption. And the third dimension is democratic institutions, or the presence of formal democratic political institutions. So this is the three dimensions that we use to identify ideal types. As we have 3 dimensions, there would be a total of 8, 3 to the power of 2, so 8 ideal types. Because we have 3 dimensions, it's not a square, but it's a cube that you can see on the right, with the 3 dimensions referring to the 3 dimensions of the typology. And based on this, we discerned 4 ideal types. So not 8, I will come back to this point later. The first one we called limited misconduct in developed democracies. In the table you can see which combination of these sets or dimensions lead, in our view, to the limited misconduct of developed democracies. And as you can see, we have that if the state is powerful, if there is societal control over corruption, and if there are strong democratic institutions. We argue that if a state is strong, but it's counterbalanced by a vigilant society and democratic checks, then corruption will be present, but it will be the exception rather than the normal way of affairs. And when it's revealed, then it will lead to criminal. It will typically lead to criminal investigations. So this is the least corrupt, so to say, ideal type. The second is partial state capture, in which there is a powerful state and there are democratic institutions, but there is weak control over corruption by the society. And we argue that in such cases, power will at times be used for private gain, and in some policy areas, elites will manage to capture the state, but not in all areas, because democratic institutions are still there to counterbalance the central state power. The third idea type is autocratic patrimonialism, in which there is a strong central state, but it's not counterbalanced either by a strong society or by democratic institutions. And we argue that under such circumstances, the ruling elites will fully capture the state, and they will tend to implement a centralized, highly centralized corruption networks, which they use to enrich themselves and entrench power. And the fourth ideal type, there is no strong central state. And we argue that if there is no central state, that irrespective of the other two dimensions, corruption will be dispersed. So there won't be one centralized corruption network, but there will be a lot of corruption, just not in one overarching centralized network. And we say that it's typically, if there is no strong central state, then typically there is no societal control over corruption, and typically there are no strong democratic institutions. But it doesn't really matter, but because if there is no leviathan, no strong state, then irrespective of the two other dimensions, the dispersed corruption will emerge, dispersed and non-constrained corruption. So these are the four idea types that we identified based on the three dimensions. And the next step.
Could we stay a little bit longer in that slide? Yes, this one. Thank you. Because this is very, very insightful, and I think to a large degree, I mean, theoretically, this is the crux of the study, right? Just to clarify, so so far this point is theoretically driven, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. You adopt the dimensions from the Acemoglu and Robinson framework, yes?
Two of the three dimensions, yes.
Right.
I mean, not exactly, but we based, like, the idea comes from them. They don't use the exact same dimensions, but the idea that there is a state and there is a society and they compete, that's from them, yes.
Yes. So could you tell us a little bit about how you connected the two of them? I find it really interesting because I'm familiar as well with a narrow corridor idea that they use for papers and in their most recent book, I believe. And so I wonder how you found that to be a good entry point for the classification of countries concerning corruption, rather than it being, for example, the way in which different democratic configurations or the capacity of the state to kind of sustain some democratic governance affects the level of corruption or the structure of corruption. You see what I mean?
Yes, I think so. So in the narrow corridor, they examine why I think the terminology is so-called despotic leviathans emerge, shackled leviathans, which is a good kind of state, and absent leviathans. So this is the three state types that they have. The shackled leviathan being a country in which there is a strong state and it's counterbalanced by a strong society. Despotic leviathan being strong state without being counterbalanced, and that would be like dictatorships. And the third one is the absent leviathan, which is no strong state power. And although their outcome is different, we argued in the paper, and that was the idea behind that. After all, corruption is a way to exploit resources, distract resources from the society. So after all, the type of corruption, especially grand corruption, is really a core feature of systems, and we believe that it works in a similar way, that states, if they are not controlled, then they will extract resources. If they are controlled, then they won't extract resources. So we believe that after all, it's the what they call Leviathan in the book, and corruption patterns are not that dissimilar, or that the two are very closely linked, in fact, to one another. But if I understood your question, you mean that democratic so our third dimension is also could be understood as an outcome of the two former dimensions, right?
Well, no, not exactly that. I guess I wonder if we could properly say that the theoretical approach for this classification is rooted in a democratic governance perspective to corruption. And I also wonder this because the influences that you draw from, that you mentioned, the syndromes of corruption from Michael Johnston and universalism versus particularism of Munju Bipidi, both authors also very much work or base their approach to corruption on this idea of deep democratization or quality of governance from a democratic perspective, right?
Yeah.
Eh, and again, so these dimensions draw very much from the suggestion, at least the way that I take it, that corruption ends up being a result or a consequence of having weak controls, controls that are ultimately democratic or toward democratic accountability, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think I understood now better what you meant. So yes, the second two dimensions, so societal control over correct and democratic institutions, are both constraints. Societal control is more like an informal kind of constraint, and democratic institutions are formal constraints. So yes, it's kind of like an institutionalist approach in which the state faces controls from or counter incentives from different sources. And yes, indeed, our work is based on this other works that you mentioned.
Thank you. And that leads me to a second question that I had concerning the ideal types themselves, right?
Yes.
Because of course you explained how the ideal type 4, once we get this low state capacity, then regardless of the score for the other two dimensions, we would expect high levels of corruption, right?
Yes, high levels and not centralized. So like yeah, dispersed. That's why we call it. Yes.
Right. So that's how instead of ending up with 8 ideal types, which a
Yes.
three-dimensional figure will suggest,
Exactly.
we actually only end up with 4 because theoretically the other ones are not relevant or applicable, correct?
Yes, yes. So like ideal type 4, in fact, includes four theoretically possible ideal types, but we say that in the absence of powerful state, it doesn't really matter whether there are democratic institutions or societal control over corruption. So it collapses for theoretically possible ideal types. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have the 3 dimensions, then we proceeded to operationalize the dimensions. 2 of the dimensions we operationalize based on 2 constituent sets or factors. We argued that the power of the state depends on or could be operationalized based on state capacity and stability. And we argued that a state can be considered powerful either if it has high state capacity to implement policies, but it can also be considered if it is maintained, if it is able to maintain stability. So basically, either strong state capacity or ability to maintain stability is sufficient for high state power. We use this approach basically to enable that both, say, Nazi Germany and Norway could be considered a strong state, because in Nazi Germany you probably wouldn't get a high score on state capacity because they didn't implement policies in all policy areas, but they were very, very, very stable. So we use this or set theoretic notion, and basically power of the state is state capacity or stability. So either of the two is sufficient for a country to have state capacity. Big power. For state capacity we use the state capacity index by O'Reilly and Murphy, and for stability we use the political stability index of world governance indicators. Similarly, we operationalized societal control over corruption based on two constituent sets or dimensions, and argued that for a strong societal control over corruption, a society must have low corruption permissiveness, so they must refuse corruption, so to say, refute corruption, and they also must be able to participate in politics. And here we say that both these factors are needed for strong societal control over corruption, which would be the end notion, the end in set theoretic terms. We operationalize corruption permissiveness based on the special Eurobarometer for EU countries and the World Value Survey for non-EU countries, and we operationalize participation using varieties of democracy participatory component index. So again, for a powerful state, it's enough either to have high state capacity or to be able to maintain stability, and for societal control, society must both have low corruption permissiveness and high participation, so that they must care about corruption, they must be able to pressure the government to be less corrupt. The third dimension was easier. We used the regimes of the world dataset, which is a part of the VDEM project, and is basically a 4-item classification for polities. I will come back to this point later, but it's kind of an off-the-shelf solution to identify, to operationalize democratic institutions.
Aaron, could I ask a question about that operationalization?
Sure.
Concerning the second one, societal control over corruption, I have two. One is just to clarify corruption permissiveness. How is that measured from the original data source? The second one, which is kind of related to it, I guess, is I wonder if you kind of struggle with the decision to operationalize that second dimension in that way, because the first one and the third one are, let's say, external to the study of corruption in a way, right? Because the first one is state capacity and stability, the third one is democratic institutions. But the second one also already include an assessment of corruption control. And then we apply this to classify the type of corruption in different countries. So I wonder if you kind of had a conversation with other colleagues about if this would be already kind of biasing the empirical classification later on, or is it separate? Could you walk us through the rationale
Yes.
here?
So the first question, in the special Eurobarometer, there is a question about, I don't remember the exact question, but there is a specific question about how much respondents dislike corruption, how permissive they are towards corruption. And in the World Value Survey, so we use this for European countries, and of course it was not available for non-European countries. So There we used value survey, where there are 4 questions about what they think of paying bribes and what they think of paying bribes in healthcare, I think. And we use the average of these questions. And as for your second question, yes, so it's one could say that it's a bit there could be a problem of endogeneity, but and yes, this question has come up. However, we say that corruption permissiveness is rather like informal institution of or like a more general norm in a society that reflects public integrity, and we argue that it's deeply rooted and it's a result of a long historical process how citizens judge like misconduct by the government, or how much they condemn the government for seizing public funds, and it's a more deep or more structural factor than the emerging type of corruption, and that's why we say that it can be considered as an antecedent of emerging corruption patterns. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, that does it. Thank you. We also have a question from Katarina. Katarina,
Yes.
go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Katarina Grop from Åbo Akademi University. And well, thank you, first of all, very interesting presentation. Gives a lot of food for thought. My question is partly linked to Joseph's question, just the second one he had just now, because over time I've been doing my research has focused very much on the linkage between political institutions and corruption. And when I look at this, the third ideal type, where you actually kind of bake in the institutional arrangement into the corruption indicator, very aware of the fact that actually creating these ideal types is complicated and measuring corruption is complicated. I mean, my first thought was from my point of view, this would be a problem from the point of view of causal analysis. But you partly answered this question already to Joseph. But is this something that you have been discussing within the team of authors? How this affects analysis?
Yes, thank you for the question, and indeed there is this issue. I think the broader issue is that we say that power of the state, societal control over corruption, and democratic institutions, and how they combine influence emerging corruption patterns. And the issue is that corruption also influences these factors. If I understood your comment, that was the main point, right? That there is like an endogeneity problem. So yes, that's true that corruption, for instance, influences democracy. In response to that, I think we can say that this is not a causal exercise that we are doing, and if it was, then we should definitely examine how corruption influences the factors, but it's a descriptive exercise. So why corruption, for instance, influences democratic institutions? It's also true that democratic institutions influence corruption. So we argue that even if there is a reverse causal pattern, then these dimensions are able to capture the incentive structure that lead to certain corruption outcomes. But definitely it's in more causal style analysis, it should be discussed more and treated explicitly this issue of reverse causation. I don't know if it answered your question.
It did, thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add something before we jump back into the presentation. So sorry for branching out, because I think the conversation is very interesting and it really connects to a number of things that we discussed, not only in terms of measuring of corruption, but about how we study corruption in general. And I may be paraphrasing here, but I think I read or heard Alina Mungiapipidi say something um, to the end of that for her it didn't make a lot of sense to explore the correlation between democratic institutions and corruption, because for her corruption is antithetical to democratic rule. So basically is we when we find corruption, we find that democratic institutions are failing. So the answer is kind of already there. Yes. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, if in fact we find that there's such interconnection of a discussion about democratic institutions and corruption, then it becomes kind of tricky, right? To what degree we examine one to assess the other, and if they are actually analytically different, and to what degree they are different.
Yeah.
If I may comment really quickly, especially if you're looking at particular institutions. So you're not just interested in the overall picture, but you want to look at presidential regimes or what have you, and their effect on corruption, then you really need to sort of distinguish the two. But very interesting, and I'm really finding this interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and I think it's a very good point. This democracy corruption nexus is of course much discussed. I think that's true that if you define democracy and corruption in like very general terms or like in quite broad manner, then they are not that much conceptually different. That said, both concepts being very, very broad, I think it's possible to define democratic institutions in such way and corruption in such way that it makes sense to talk about causal link between them. So here, for instance, we focus on formal political institutions, or that's how we talk about democratic institutions, and corruption patterns, on the other hand, are like much more informal. They are networks. They are prevalence of particular types of corruption. So why the two are related, not only empirically but also conceptually to some extent, I think it still makes sense to discern them, and I think it may be an oversimplification to say that it's just the same thing because the two are related. It doesn't mean that they are conceptually identical, I think. So I think if we define corruption and democratic institutions carefully in a way that they don't overlap very much, then it's possible to discuss the relationship between the two, and indeed there is a lot of literature about that. Shall I proceed, or any other questions or comments here?
Yes, I don't think we have any other questions at this point.
Okay, but thank you very much for the comments, and yes, I think it's a very, very interesting and important aspect of not only of this paper, but maybe corruption and democracy research in a broader sense. So now we have raw data for the dimensions and the constituent sets for the two of the dimensions. The next step is calibrating raw data into fuzzy set membership scores. So again, fuzzy set membership scores are numbers from 0 to 1, indicating the degree to which a case belongs to a set or belongs to a dimension. Fuzzy set membership score 1 in democracy would mean that it's super democratic. Fuzzy set membership score 0, it's the contrary. There are different ways to calibrate raw data. Into fuzzy set membership scores, we use the so-called direct method, which uses logistic regressions to calculate the membership score. And for this method, the researcher must identify 3 critical points in terms of the raw data. First, the so-called fully in point, which is the raw data value for total membership. So with the house example, I don't know, you could say that 400 square meters is a fully in point. If a flat is 400 square meters, we can confidently say that it's a very, very big idea, typically big house. Second, similar, just the other end. Third in this list is the fully out point, which would mean a membership score of 0. With the flat example, you could say that, I don't know, that's 10 square meters, because that's really like the smallest possible flat that you could think of. And you can comfortably say that it's an ideal typical case of a small flat. And the most important point is the rather in point, which is kind of the cutoff value, which means the membership score of 0.51. So this rather in point is when you can already say that the house is rather big than small. This is very critical because ideal type assignment will exactly depend on how you define the cutoff point. So for instance, with the houses example, you could say that this cutoff value or this rather in point is, I don't know, 70 square meters, then you can say that the house is rather big than small. This is the most critical among the 3 points. But for each row variable, we have to define these 3 points, and based on that, a function calculates the houses and membership score. So first, sorry, I didn't put back the big screen. First, the power of the state dimension. As I mentioned, power of the state is stability or state capacity. Here on the on the left, you can see some descriptive statistics of the raw data for state capacity and stability. And in the lower part, you can see the fully out, rather than the fully in points. We used country cases to set these critical points. So we said that the value of Libya in state capacity would be the absence of state capacity. We said that Philippines is a good cutoff value because the state doesn't have huge capacity, but nonetheless there is state capacity that and then the state is capable of implementing policies. And we said that Sweden can be considered fully in the idea, the fully in case of state capacity, where we say that like that's they have a very good state capacity. And we did the same with stability. Maybe it's not that important, this details. Because we used OR for stability and state capacity, it means that a country is considered to have state capacity, to have some state capacity. So because we used OR for the power of the state, if a country has at least 0.5 stability or 0.5 state capacity, it means that it's closer to the ideal typical powerful state than the ideal typical big state. So in this green area is the set of countries which have a membership score in power of the state higher than 0.5, so they are closer to a powerful state than to a weak state. This lower quadrant is the group of the countries that we consider that the power of the state is rather absent at present. It was slightly different with societal control over corruption. We used the same calibration method. We identified the fully out case, the rather in case, and the fully in case. But here we used AND to link permissiveness and participation. And this means that countries to have to be in the group of strong societal control countries, they need to have both low corruption permissiveness and high participation. So here, the rather in countries in societal control where corruption are in the upper right quadrant, whereas if they don't have either low permissiveness and high participation, they will be closer to the weak societal control part.
Aaron, could I ask you a question about
Yes, sure.
this one? And just as a parenthesis, by the way, uh, really good way of kind of explaining very difficult processes. I with the visuals, it really makes the case for me. So thank you for that. Um, so in this green quadrant, we're looking at the cases where there is sufficient societal control over corruption, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and if I am,
No, I wouldn't say sufficient, but they are those who rather have than not societal control
right,
over corruption.
and so if I'm interpreting the country acronym correct, I see Slovakia, Lithuania, New Zealand, right? Finland, Sweden, Belgium.
Yeah, here, right?
I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious about that NGA.
That must be Nigeria, I think.
Yes, so that kind of made me curious if that would be correct that Nigeria is classified as
Yeah, so
having.
like according to this,
Hmm.
Nigeria has like point maybe like 55 participation and point maybe 80 something permissiveness, which means low permissiveness, by the way. So
Right.
one in the permissiveness scale is very low permissiveness.
Mm-mm.
Yes, I will come back to this point later. There are questionable numbers, to put it simply. Um, Basically, we use the data we had, and it's
Sure.
possible that in some cases the data was not of the highest quality. And yes, I mean, I'm not very familiar with the Nigerian case, but you may be right that it's maybe not very convincing that Nigeria belongs to the rather in group here. So
Attila wants to
Yeah,
jump into this.
may I interfere here just for so if there is a major limitation of our research, this is the data quality, and in particular concerning the societal control dimensions. We made huge efforts how to find the better sources and the most reliable ones and how to combine for the measurement issues. In some sense, it was a negative experience that this societal control of corruption is quite weakly measured. And what is the available data set and largely used? This is the World Value Survey data set. And we are aware of the strong and probably valid criticisms about these survey data. There were some other authors who used, by the way, these four components of behavioral, let's say, calibration of corruption in public transport, in healthcare, and other areas. But what we could see that probably this is a very endogenous, the wording of the questions, that in some societies, let us compare, for example, Nigeria and Canada. And what you could see from the country case research is that in the case of Canada, the tolerance is much lower, but this means that already relatively um, small corruption is considered to be very serious. And probably it could be the opposite case. We tried to replace the world value survey questions with other ones, but this is some sort of compromise what you have to do, that whether to give up the ambitions, this is option one, and not considering the societal control dimension. But theoretically, we consider to be is justified, and it could be a very good value added for future research. That is why I think one of our ambitions that how to find better indicators for the measurement of the societal control over corruption, and that would be an interesting issue. We are aware of the data problems, and in several country cases, this may be quite obvious. So that is why our practice is not. How can I say 100% good practice in the sense that we will know much more about the countries themselves. It could be rather considered to be as an illustration that which are the mechanisms, the patterns, and we obviously we are aware of the limitations that are mainly related to the available comparable data.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's thank you.
It also makes me wonder if it's actually a limitation or perhaps even part of the strength of the paper. And so I'm trying to see it from a different perspective, right? Um, because so I see here Japan at maximum score for permissiveness, which means that they are intolerant of corruption, right? But below the threshold for participation. As a foreigner living in Japan, I gotta say that checks out for me. That makes perfect sense, really. Um, so so I'm starting to see this dimension as mobilization or capacity or potential for society to mobilize in reaction to corruption. Yes. So of course the dimension here is labeled as societal control over corruption, but I'm reading more of as a potential. The framework is constructed in a three-dimensional way. It does kind of like invite questions for me. It's interesting that Nigeria has that potential from the societal perspective, but then I wonder if the reason why corruption is much more widespread is because of some of the other components, right? Well, right now we're only looking at one dimension of a larger equation. Uh, so perhaps it is the situation with the state that prompts corruption to be much higher. Very very interesting. I don't know. It invites many questions just looking at the nitty gritty of the data itself. I feel. Thank you, Attila. Thank you, Aaron.
And just one side note to what Attila said, that well, here we use this kind of perhaps strange approach that we use the different raw data for EU countries, for non-EU countries, and in fact, this was because we thought that the corruption barometer is better, and where we could, we used that, but it was not available for non-EU countries, but we still wanted to rely on that because we thought it was better for EU countries. So this is why we mixed these two sources, because I mean, it's still the WBS still measures to some extent, but maybe it's less precise than the Eurobarometer. So yeah, and I think this, as Attila said, this is the least reliable data source, probably the worldwide use survey among those we use. Yeah, so these are the quadrants, and the third one was easy, so to say, and this regimes of the world classification system is quite established. It's done by the Varieties of Democracy Institute based on VDAM data, but it's a category variable. It discerns four types of regimes, which are closed autocracy, electoral democracy, and liberal democracy. And so it was quite easy to find membership scores, liberal democracy having a membership score of 1, closed autocracy a membership score of 0, and the two others having 2.33 and 0.33 and 0.67. So basically here we didn't really need to calibrate, we just had it readily available, so to say. So now the results. We have a large table, as Joseph asked at the beginning. This method allows for calculating membership scores for each country and for each idea type. So this is what you see on the left. This is just the first 10 countries, I think, because there was simply no space to put, I don't know, 80 countries. But this is just for you to see that Albania had a membership score of 0.3391. Again, 0.33 membership score in IT2. It had a membership score of 0.59 in IT3 and 0.30 in IT4, which means that it's the closest to the third idea type, but it's not very close. It's just closer to the third idea type than the others. By contrast, if you look at, I don't know, say Australia, then it has a membership score of 0.83 in idea type 1 and very low membership score in the other idea types. It means that it's quite close to the first idea type and quite far from the other. So there we can say that it's similar to an ideatypical case. So again, this I think is the strength of this fuzzy type analysis. It doesn't just say that one country is one idea type and other countries another, but it also allows to ascertain the degree to which cases are similar to idea types. This is the result of the classification exercise on the right. Here we just listed countries without the membership score. So some countries, as I mentioned, are closer to the idea type than the others. But nonetheless, this list is the countries which are most similar to the first, second, third, and fourth idea types. The first group of countries is the most populous. There are mostly developed democratic countries. And the second idea type, partial state capture, is also quite populous. It's maybe United States is an interesting case there. Also Japan, maybe a bit surprising, but for instance, as for the United States, that we argue that in fact it may not be a data issue that it's there, but as we know, there are very institutionalized way of like buying favors and for businesses to buy themselves into politics in the campaign process. So maybe the United States is not that surprising in this group. The third group is autocratic patrimonialism. There is Hungary, where we are from, for instance, which is, I think, a very typical case of a country where corruption is very centralized. This is what we see in Hungary. And other countries which are not very democratic, but have a rather strong central state, which is able to implement centralized corruption networks. And there are 17 countries in the fourth idea type. Sorry, not 17, but 21 in total in the fourth idea type. It shows that most countries, if you remember, in this fourth idea type, there were a total of 4 theoretically possible idea types or combinations of the dimensions. And we said that basically if there is no strong central state, then the other 2 dimensions don't matter. But as we can see, most countries which don't have a strong central state also don't have societal control over corruption and also don't have strong democratic institutions. There are a few examples for this, but most of them don't have either of these dimensions. And here is the same information on using a map. We had data for all dimensions for a total of, I think, 83 countries. So that's why there are many white countries for those who didn't have data. Yes. So this is basically the result of the whole classification exercise. Well, just a few discussion conclusion points. First, and I think that's the main point of of the paper, the typology shows that exemplifies that corruption is a multifaceted phenomenon, and that it's important to focus not only on quantitative differences or differences in degree, but also on differences in kind in corruption across countries. I think where we made the most contribution relative to previous efforts is that there have been typologies, but our typology allows for a more formal and systemic approach to create the typology, and especially to assign cases to the ideal types. So this is, I think, where we stepped away most from extant literature into corruption typologies, and for this we use this fuzzy set ideal type analysis for the first time. Although we have data limitations, as we mentioned, we still believe that this classification can be useful as an off-the-shelf tool to compare countries and compare corruption patterns of countries' experience. We also believe that qualitative differences in the nature of corruption have important implications for anti-corruption policies, because probably it's good to address different corruption patterns by different sets of policies. For instance, in countries which experience autocratic patrimonialism, so the third type, incremental, small-scale anti-corruption reforms will not be very useful. Conversely, one may argue that in IT1 countries, so where corruption is mostly constrained and hidden, even incremental reforms may be successful to some extent. Another potential use of the typology is to use it for case selection for future case studies. Maybe it's just a useful, again, off-the-shelf tool to just select countries based on the corruption pattern they experience and they have. And we have already discussed this, but I wanted to highlight here that we believe that the main shortcoming of the article, there are others too, of course, but the main shortcoming is data quality and availability. So if we had more data for more countries and especially better quality data, then probably this classification would be significantly improved. If we have data for longer time periods, we could also make temporal comparisons, which could be very interesting to see how certain countries transform from one ideal type to another. We couldn't do this because there was, for all data sources we used, there was a very limited intersection, so we couldn't really do temporal analysis. This was all from my part. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are looking forward to answer any questions or to your comments.
Thank you so much, Aaron. This was really wonderful. I would like to open the floor for anyone that would like to ask a question or make a comment. Perhaps you can. Yes, that's better. So maybe I can just get the ball rolling if no one is ready just yet. You know this, that the presentation, as much as when reading the paper, really makes me think about a lot in terms of the way that we recognize corruption is following the tradition of Michael Johnston's syndromes of corruption is quite illuminating to see how we can infer the types of corruption and the spread of corruption by looking at classification based on political institutions, right? Because the dimensions, as we discussed earlier, they're based on democratic governance. But when we look at the results are very intuitive as well, right? Those groupings, for the most part, make a lot of sense in terms of what we know about corruption in those countries. which is fantastic. Yet at the same time, it requires us to do away with some of the nuance within those groupings as well, right? And Robin, for example, just mentioned in the chat something about Australia, right? So Australia is categorized as ideal type number one, which is very limited misconduct. But Australians would significantly disagree, right? Uh, and of course, we can talk about what it means, so how corruption looks like within the first category, but based on the dimension selected, we end up finding ourselves having to describe them as low corruption. Yes, no, so not as one specific type of corruption, but rather low corruption in general. Um, so after the long-winded comment, I would like to know how you and the rest of the team felt when looking at these results, these outcomes. How satisfied, I mean, did it invite you to think about, oh, I would like to follow up, with different type of data, or looking at one specific dimension? So what sort of kind of like an unanswered question remained from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. And I think to some extent, any typology and any classification will suffer for this issue. That basically, from a bird's eye perspective, what we do is that there is a lot of countries, they are very different, and yet we try to find groups of countries that are somewhat similar. And I think we cannot escape that there will be intra-group heterogeneity. So we don't say that countries in an ideal type are very, very similar to one another, nor do we say that they are very, very similar to the ideal types. We say that they are more similar to each other than to countries from the other ideal types. So I think I think we got this type of comments, and I'm sure they are justified. That like some people were saying that their country is not I don't know, they don't have limited corruption, and I mean, for sure that is the case, especially if you see it from the inside. But yet I think I'm not familiar with the Australian case, so maybe it's not the case, but probably you could say that it's closer to that ideal type than, I don't know, to autocratic patrimonialism or to dispersed and unconstrained corruption. So here the emphasis on that these countries are somewhat similar, and they are similar in some aspects, but they are also very heterogeneous, and they may be quite far from the ideal typical case. But I think it may be an interesting area if us or anyone else goes along on the basis of this study to also to do case studies of countries from different ideal types, but also, as you mentioned, to compare countries within ideal types. And a very interesting exercise would be to do a categorization which is more fine-grained, so not 4 ideal types, but more. And that would allow for identify groups of countries that are more similar, and there we have less this problem that we say that, I don't know, corruption is constrained in Austria, whereas it's not. That would be very interesting also to find the dimensions that allow for such a categorization, and of course we would also need more fine-grained data for it. But that's definitely, I think, an interesting area to explore the within group differences, and in line with that to further detail or establish new categories within the ideal types. And I would also like to reiterate the data limitation part. So that was said, it's easily possible that some countries are just not where they should be. And that stems from the data limitation, I think, and probably many of you who are more familiar with the cases can spot countries which are like surprising or they are not where they should be. But again, perhaps later when we have better data, then we can do more informed classification.
Thank you. That leads me to another question that I also had. Are there plans to revisit the analysis either with updated data or potentially even running a longitudinal study to see how countries have moved potentially from one type to another, or how well they would classify under one ideal type across the years?
Mm-hmm. We just published this paper recently, so we haven't started writing another, but I would say that I think this could be very interesting, the temporal analysis, or if there is better data to kind of redo or update the whole thing. So I would say that this is a plan in the drawer that when the time comes, we will go on and perhaps do a second article with better data or with another cross-sectional, like another point in time. So I hope it will happen at some point.
May I adjust some small aspects to this future possibilities and plans, because the data limitations and this sometimes uncomfortable perception of the particular country groupings and the country crazes, this is also potential for us. So I guess there are at least two ways. One, that the critical dimension, this societal control over corruption, try to find or using existing data in some manner that are more reliable, more valid in the sense that they are giving a better perspective from a comparative perspective. The other one, and your comment about the Australian case also reminds me that actually the other opportunity is within, especially the first and perhaps the second group, would be very interesting to make intra-group comparative case studies. And in that case, for instance, those kind of endogeneity that according to the international indices, the corruption is high or moderate, but at the same time, this is mainly because of the wording of the questions are heavily dependent on what we consider to be normal and abusive, and could be very different. And I guess that Australian colleagues are probably they have much higher expectations about the normalcy than it could be in some less developed societies where the corruption is more normalized. So some sort of comparative small n case studies could be very interesting if we have the same types of measurements and we can check a little bit this endogeneity dimension of the societal control over corruption. I think this would be perhaps the most interesting part for future research, because the other two dimensions are quite well measured, although we have to admit that we were also surprised sometimes that this state capacity measurement was at the level of country cases sometimes are very surprising and not in line with our intuitions and the broader knowledge about particular country cases. So again, the criticism about the international indices in general is in some sense confirmed by our research as well. So there are multiple streams, and I think we and hopefully others will do these types of research in the future. Um, from the perspective of the whole scientific community, I think that the most promising issue and the most critical one is this societal control over corruption. How can we measure it? How can we make a good comparison, either globally or in a larger set of countries, or in a small and country setting?
Thank you so much, Attila. That is really inspiring to hear that eh, there's an important platform here in terms of the recent publication to continue exploring this dynamic, and that certainly this is not the end of the story, but rather a very good launching pad to continue exploring again, not just the grouping, the nuance within these specific ideal types, and also to sometimes reflect on our own intuition and assumptions, right? I think that is quite exciting when we find a country classified in a way that is surprising. Uh, I mean, that's what the data is saying, right? So perhaps the question is, why is it that we think that the country should have been classified in a different way? Perhaps we need to revisit our own assumptions. So I think that that's really, it provides a lot of food for thought for us. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation, Aaron. Tila, it's wonderful having both of you here with us today, and I look forward to seeing what you work on next.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you all for coming, and thank you very much also for the insightful questions and suggestions. It was a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation, and it was really good, the questions and the eyes. So the eye contact was also very good in the inspiring, I think, us in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Very glad to hear that. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for news about the next roundtable. See you then.